Welcome. My name is Dr. Craig Bartholio. I currently serve as the chair of the Department of Special Education here at Azusa Pacific University. And so today we're going to talk about IEP meetings. And I look at IEP meetings from a certain perspective. When I did my doctoral work at USC, my dissertation focused on action and decision steps that people took when they did a medical procedure. And so you're probably thinking, why did you study that when you got your doctorate in educational leadership? But when you make decisions and you're using your cognitive knowledge, right? And so a lot of times we as teachers tell people what to do, not necessarily how to do it. And so working in the field of special education, conducting IEPs, it's a lot of tasks. We need to do this, we need to do this. And so, okay, sorry. But sometimes there's a lot of decisions that happen within an IEP meeting that sometimes can lead to negative reactions, could lead to mediation, could lead to upset parents, could lead to difficulty that exists within the IEP. So what I've done is that I've interviewed a lot of people of how do they conduct IEP meetings, what are the processes that you can conduct IEP meetings. You can go online and you can get the 10 steps to an IEP meeting, the 20 steps to an IEP meeting. They're going to tell you really what to do. They're not going to really tell you how to do it. And so as we go through this process, I want you to think about, because we will talk about what you are supposed to do with an IEP meeting, but I also want you to think about how you're doing that. And so hopefully I'm going to bring that to today's presentation. Today's presentation, I'm going to do my best not to sound like a manual, because sometimes when you talk about IEPs, it is very dry, it's very cut and dry. There's certain specific things you have to do. But in a sense, you are talking about an individual. You are talking about a human. You're talking about a student that has needs and concerns, and you're talking about parents and their needs and concerns for that child, and all the stakeholders that are involved in the IEP meeting. They're all focused regarding the student. And so I always like to start talking about Raleigh. Raleigh is still the standard. So an IEP meeting, it's a legal document and it's a snapshot. You make the best guess estimate based on all the knowledge you could have, based on the student's rate of success in previous IEP meetings, and you make a snapshot, make a best guess. Based on the knowledge that we have, this is what we're going to do. And basically, you are providing the opportunity for educational benefit. In the field of special education, as much as we want our students to maximize their potential and make ultimate grade level growth, Raleigh is still, it's a nice support, because when students, they make minimal growth, they make some growth. As a special education teacher, as a school that's supporting students with special needs, we can rely on Raleigh that we have provided the opportunity for educational benefit, and the student has made some growth, some significant growth, and so we can rely on that as a standard to anchor on when things don't necessarily go the way that the parent wants. Maybe a parent wants a full grade level growth or 2 grade levels of growth, but sometimes that just doesn't happen. So at an IEP meeting, there's a lot of people there, and everyone has their own perspective. And what I want you to think about is I want you to think about role theory and position theory. What is your role as a special education teacher? And how are people going to respond to you and interact with you due to your role? And if you're a school psychologist, if you're a parent, if you're the assistant principal, if you're the principal, if you're an advocate, depending on what role you have there at the IEP meeting, people are going to position you in a certain light. They're going to talk to you in a certain way due to the role that you have. And that's just human nature. We're all going to do that no matter where we are and what location. When we introduce ourselves, when we meet new people, we get a general sense of who they are, what position they may have, and we're going to approach them from that perspective. And that's what role theory and position theory kind of talks about. So I'm just asking you, as you develop your skills in running IEP meetings, just have that understanding that sometimes you want to talk to a parent a certain way, and you will love the parent to talk to you in a certain way, and maybe they're not. And maybe they're not because of the role they see you having, or the position that you have. And so this is I want you to take that different perspective. Welcome, thank you for coming. And so today, I really want you to think about what a parent's perspective is. I also want you to understand that school districts, administrators, they have their own perspective. School districts have limited funds. So as a former program specialist, I know that I was coached going into an IEP meeting about a certain scenario that may be happening, and we may have had information regarding a certain request a parent may or may not have. I'm going to just throw something out there. My child has a learning need, and a service I want is I want my child to ride on a horse through water because that's going to help them meet their learning goals. Okay, well, that's a little out there. I thank you for your request, but I'm not so sure that that will actually meet the needs of your son or daughter. And so sometimes parents can ask for interesting things, and so it's the IEP team to look at those and see if they're, number one, are they research-based? Number two, will it really meet the needs of the child? And sometimes, as a former program specialist, we had to say no. And this is our FAPE offer. And we're going to get into what a FAPE offer is a little bit later, and then who gets to say the FAPE offer. And what is educational benefit, and what is reasonably calculated? If we go back to Raleigh, you want to make sure that your IEP is reasonably calculated, and you do that based on looking at the student's progress. And if they've been in special education for a few years, you could look back at previous IEP goals, previous IEP present levels of performance and services, and say, have they made much progress over the years? And so that you're kind of doing an educational benefit review. What goals have they had? Have the goals changed? Have the goals modified? Have they switched different academic domains? Have they gone from math to reading? What do the scores look like? Are things progressing up? Is the rate of progress going at a certain direction? Is it flatlining? What's happening? Because that's going to really determine what goals you're going to present, because when there's needs, there's services and goals. So this just kind of gives you an idea of an Iep meeting cost. I have been in an Iep meeting that it did not last 24 hours in one shot, but we did meet over 4 days, and every single day was a 6-hour meeting, and there were 14 people there. So if you average, people make about $50,000 a year. How much that meeting costs, in terms of not only cost of money, but cost of time and effort. And so I love it when I hear IEP meetings take about 1 hour, because that's the ultimate goal. But sometimes when there's advocates, when you have independent assessments that you have to review, and there's 14 people, sometimes that takes a while. And logistically, sometimes that can be straining on everyone. So as we go through this presentation, I just want you to know the focus of this presentation is kind of pre-IEP meeting stuff, during the IEP meeting, and post-IEP meeting. And so if you're here earlier for Dr. Bobby's presentation, it kind of mirrors what she was talking about. And so a lot of things that you do as a special education teacher before the IEP meeting is based on who you are as an individual, knowing that you are the case manager, knowing that you're kind of, I view the special education teacher, and now I'm talking about role theory, right, and positioning theory, because people can have different perspectives. But as a former special education teacher and a program specialist, I view the special education teacher as the air traffic controller, right? They are the person, they're the case manager of the student, and there's going to be a lot of individuals that they're going to work with towards this IEP meeting. You can have a school psychologist, you can have a school counselor, you can have an occupational therapist, speech and language pathologist, adaptive physical education. Obviously, you have the parent. Sometimes you have the student, depending on the age, depending on the culture of the school district you're in. Some school districts want the student there. Some school districts, that's not part of the way they do things. And so as I talk about the process of going through an IEP meeting, you always have to think about the school district that you work within. and the culture and the rules that they have set forth. Because I might say something that you can say, well, our school district doesn't do things that way. It may be something that you can approach your program specialist or your coordinator or your assistant principal. Have we ever thought of doing this for IEP meetings? So you're going to be the world's biggest collaborator for your student. And in a way that you have to understand your role as a district. Because quite often the special education teacher takes on the role of an advocate for the parent of the child with special needs. And at the same time, they are an employee of the school district. So you kind of play two roles. You represent the school district, but you also represent the needs of the student and the parent. And sometimes that can be a benefit, and sometimes that could be a hindrance. So I want you to understand, what that means to you as a future special education teacher. When you are getting ready for the IEP meeting, there's a lot of paperwork that needs to be taken care of. Of course, there's the assessment plan. The parents need to be involved in what the assessment plan means. They need to be informed who's going to do the assessments, what's that going to look like. And then reports are going to come in. Your role as a special education teacher is to make sure that everyone has access to as many of the reports as possible, especially the parent. Because quite often you go to an IEP meeting and there might be 10 people there, and you're presenting all this information to the parent, and at the end of the 60 minutes, I'm sorry, I'm going to use you because you're standing in front of me, at the end of the 60 minutes or the 2 hours where you have just shared all this information with the parent and you're asking them, okay, can you make a decision now? And that's quite often the answer. I'm still processing all these reports. And so one of the things that I want you to think about is that, can we get these reports to the parents ahead of time? And your role as a special education teacher, working with the school psychologist, the OT, the APE teacher, the speech and language pathologist, and they're writing their reports. They're professionals, they have a schedule, they need to get things done on their timeline and working with your timeline, and you're working the best for the parent to try to get those reports to the parent within 5 to 10 days before the IEP meeting, so they have a chance to review the report, digest it, so when they enter the IEP meeting, they have a general sense of what's going on. And this works whether the parent is not in education or whether they're actually a special education teacher. Because even if the parent is a special education teacher, at that meeting, they're a parent of a child with special needs. Their role is not being a special education teacher. And I've been in IEP meetings where, as a program specialist, I'm there with a parent with a child with special needs when they're hearing the information regarding the assessments of their child. This is their child. And so it was emotional, and it was personal. And they're looking at from the role of being a parent. What can I do to benefit my child? What can I do to make sure that my child gets the supports and services that they need? And so going back to role theory and position theory, you possibly at one point in your life may have an IEP meeting with a colleague who might be a special education teacher in your district or your school site. But at that meeting, they are a parent, and that's their role. They're not their professional. So there are some things out there that, that I learned over the years, is that a lot of people think that you need to give parents a 10-day notice, that somehow that's a legal requirement. The legal requirement says you need to give them reasonable notice. A lot of people refer to 10 days because that's kind of two business weeks, and so that allows people to change their schedule. But if you need to have an IEP meeting regarding a child, regarding some element of the IEP that needs to be changed, some goals, some services, if you called everyone and everyone can reconvene within 3 days, you can't, right? And so your role as a special education teacher, you need to make sure the invitation clearly states everyone that's going to be there, who's going to be there, and where it's going to be held. Quite often, when you have an invitation, there are individuals that might not be able to be there. Who here is working at a high school or wants to work at a high school? No? Okay. So sometimes a lot of times when you're having an IEP meeting regarding a student at a high school, they're going to have depending on what high school, they might have 5 or 6 other teachers, right? But some of the teachers may or may not be able to be at the IEP meeting. And so your invitation to the parent, if another teacher will not be able to make the IEP, that needs to be on the invitation. Because if that parent anticipates their English teacher or their history teacher or their math teacher to be there, and the invitation states that on this day they can't be there, that parent may want to reschedule, right? And because they need to be informed of who's going to be there. Quite often, if a general education teacher is not there, they would provide a written report, a progress of how they're doing in the classroom. So there are some ways, not ways around it, but there are some ways to possibly allow the parent to feel comfortable coming to an IEP meeting if a general education teacher is not there. But in my past, I've had some experiences where not every single teacher is going to be there, and the parent says, you know what, I want to make sure we're going to meet when everyone is going to be present. Because it's one of those opportunities where you have this developed shared schema of everyone talking about this one student. And so if it's done where everyone is talking except for 1 or 2 people, these 1 or 2 people are not involved in the conversation, they're not hearing everything, and they might be reading about it afterwards, but it's not the same. So as a parent, I can understand that they want to make sure that everyone is there. And so your role as the special education teacher, kind of quarterbacking this IEP meeting, while it may be an inconvenience of rescheduling or trying to make sure everyone has room in their schedule, we also have to consider that this meeting that we're having regarding this student, if it's one meeting that we're having of the year, it's the one meeting this parent has been thinking about probably all year long. Because as a special education teacher, you may have a caseload of 15 to 28 to 30 students where you, in your calendar, I have so many IEP meetings. I have triennials, I have annuals, I have 30 days, I have an emergency behavior intervention plan meeting, and this one parent, I just can't get them to come in. You're right. From your perspective, you're absolutely right. You do have a work schedule. You do have all these IEP meetings to come to. But to this one parent, this is their one opportunity to get to listen to every single person that's involved in their child's life. And so sometimes we need to take a step back and say, okay, if I was that parent, what would I want? And so when we're inviting people to IEP meetings, it's also important to understand that when we make a commitment to them that we're going to have an IEP meeting on a certain day, we do our best to honor that commitment. Because as professionals, we have sick days, we have vacation days, we have the opportunity to get paid while we're not at work, when we're working in the school district environment. Some of our parents don't have that luxury. Depending on where you're working, Azusa Pacific University used to have a campus in the Ventura area. And so in the Ventura area, you have a lot of day laborers. And when I was working with candidates that were working in the Oxnard and Ventura school district, when they would have an IEP meeting, that parent that would come to that IEP meeting lost wages that day. And if that IEP meeting got canceled and another one got rescheduled, they lost 2 days of wages because of the position of the job that they have. And so our responsibility as professionals we kind of need to honor the meeting date that we have. What makes the meeting go well is sharing of information. I mentioned this before. If you can send home documentation at least 5 days before. And what would be great is if the school psychologist is calling the parent and saying, here's my report, here's a copy, let's go over it. If the speech and language pathologist, if the OT, if the APE teacher does that as well. If they're not able to, if the parent can at least have a copy of the report so they can read it over before the IEP meeting, that'd be great. Another thing is that sometimes when we're trying to invite parents to an IEP meeting, their schedule is so unique, they never respond to your invitation. As a former special education teacher, I drove to the parents' work and I said, hey, we're trying to have a meeting on this day. Because every single time I sent home a document, it just never came back. I drove, I went there, this person worked in a restaurant, this person had a unique schedule where they were working at night, and so their communication with their child, it was just always missed. We don't really know what's going on in the home life all the time. And so she was actually very, happy that I went there to talk to her in person, and so she was able to go to the IEP meeting. Quite often we want people to come here face to face, right? But we're living in the 21st century, so sometimes you can have an IEP meeting where the parents Skype in, the parents phone in. It's not the best, but there are ways that parents can connect with us during an IEP meeting. So you've done the assessment plan. People have created assessments. You've sent them home. You've communicated with the parent. You have communicated with all the stakeholders. Everyone is coming June 15th for this IEP meeting to talk about Craig. That's me. So, and then when you arrive there, here's something else you need to think about. You know your location. You know where you are. Has your parent ever been to your school? Does your parent know where your classroom is? Is your parent familiar where the IEP meeting room is? If they're not, then wouldn't it be lovely that someone is in the front of the school waiting for their parent to show up, welcoming them, greeting them, and then walking them back to the IEP meeting room? Additionally, quite often, in that IEP meeting room, you might have 4 or 6 or 10 people. They're already seated around the U-shaped tables, right? And then there's one spot right in the middle for the parent. Okay, I guess I sit right here, and then there's 20 of you guys, right? What if everyone is still standing up? And then there is a welcoming, a gathering to let's sit down and let's begin our meeting, where parents could choose where they want to sit. Now, granted, the person that has the laptop needs to be close to holes in the wall so the laptop doesn't die, and if there's a projector, that person might need to be in a certain location, but that might be one seat. But everyone else, do we all have to have assigned seats? Wouldn't it be nice if we could just all choose where we want to sit? What if the parent wants to sit right next to the person with the laptop? You never know. And isn't that more welcoming? And then, wouldn't you like to know, whenever you go to a meeting, exactly what you're going to talk about? As a professional, it's really wonderful to have an agenda. You have introductions, parent concerns, assessment reports, review goals and objectives, and ... Because if you have a preset agenda, then what if the parent wants to talk about something? That's why I always had a partially completed agenda. And I would get participation from the members at the IEP meeting. All right, this is our agenda so far. Anyone else have anything they want to talk about? And I would make sure I look at the parent, and I would make sure I would ask the parent, is there anything else you want to make sure that we talk about today? And then you write it down. You can write it down on a whiteboard. You can write it down on the giant sticky pieces of paper that you can have in the room. But you want to get a general sense of everyone's needs are going to be discussed. Everyone's needs are going to be attempted to be met, because you can't always meet everyone's needs. But then once you have the agenda, you ask everyone, is everyone agreeing to this agenda? Once you have that, you move on. Another thing you want to establish is that you want to have meeting norms. It's one thing to have an agenda. This is a list of items we're going to talk about. It's another thing to have meeting norms. Because sometimes in your IEP meetings, the discussions might get a little hot. Your parents might get a little upset. There might be an advocate that needs to bring up a topic. And to be honest, I'd rather work with lawyers than advocates. In my opinion, advocates, they fight more than lawyers do. Lawyers tend to just sit there, listen to an IEP meeting, at the end say thank you very much. They go back, they review everything, then they write their letter. Advocates, in my opinion, have always been more verbal in an IEP meeting and tend to make the IEP meetings last a little bit longer than they need to. Parents need advocates. Nothing against advocates. I'm just saying as a professional what I preferred. So sometimes when you know you're going to have a contentious IEP meeting, and it's just nice to have it at an IEP meeting anyways, what are some norms? Because sometimes when you're having an IEP meeting, people forget why you're actually there. Why are you at an IEP meeting? You're there for a human. You're there for a student, a female, a male student, from kindergarten to transition. They're in special education for a reason, and you're there to talk about the next year of their life. And one of the ways that I have found that kind of dissolved a contentious IEP meeting is you usually ask the parent to bring out a picture of their child. And the parent brings out a picture of the child and puts it on the table. And then that allows everyone to refocus. We're talking about this person right here. Because sometimes when you're in an IEP meeting, remember I talked about role theory and position theory? People are talking from their position. People are talking from their role. People are talking from their wants, their hurt, their anger. And not always are they talking about the needs of the child. So sometimes when you bring out a picture of the child, that kind of deflates the conversation. That kind of puts away people's anger. Not all the times, not 100%, but sometimes that does help. So in review, these are the pre-IEP meeting major factors. And so then we get into the IEP meeting. I'm not going to read everything up there, but one of the first things that I like to do when I start an IEP meeting is I like to send around the signature page. It's kind of like the attendance. Who's here? Who's here at the IEP meeting? So you send it around. And the parents, sometimes the parents are really concerned. Am I agreeing to the IEP meeting already? No, mom, no dad. You're just saying that you're here, right? And so we want to have introductions. And when we introduce ourselves, I always like to say who I am and how I know the child. As a program specialist, I didn't always have the opportunity to actually know the child. I did my best to get to know who the child was, go to the classroom, do an informal observation, but sometimes I was asked to go to an IEP meeting because I was sent there by the district office. We're going to have this IEP meeting. We feel it might be a little hot, get out of hand. They're bringing an advocate. There's going to be a lawyer there. We need a district representative there. And I might not know anything about what's happening. So I had to be honest. Hi, I'm Craig Bartholio. I'm a program specialist for the district. And I apologize, but I haven't had the opportunity to meet your son or daughter yet. But I am here representing the district. But then everyone else can talk about who they are and how they know the child and how they know the student. Hi, I'm the mom. Hi, I'm the dad. Hi, I'm the special education teacher. I've had a pleasure of your son or daughter being in my class all year long. And so we want to make sure that everyone is there, everyone is introduced, and that what role do they play and how they know the child. Of course, procedurally, it's always nice to ask the parents if they want a copy of the procedural. Really? I have 10 minutes? Wow. This goes by really quickly. You want to make sure the parents have procedural safeguards. You always want to ask them, And so, and here's some things that quite often have led to IEP meetings going to mediation. At the end of an IEP meeting, sometimes parents say, I was never involved in the IEP meeting. And you think to yourself, you sat there for 2 hours and you were never involved. There's two ways that you can always get parents to be involved in IEP meetings. You always review the agenda and you ask for the parent input on the IEP meeting agenda, and you document that in the meeting notes. Mom, is the agenda okay with you? Yes? Okay. Now, in addition, I'm going to skip this. When you are, and then the beautiful thing about an IEP meeting is that quite often it's through an electronic format. You either have Wellington or you have SACE, or back in the day you had IEP Pro, where the IEP meeting kind of goes from the first page of the demographics all the way through the present levels of performance, assessments, the goals, and the levels of services. So in running an IEP meeting, it's very easy to just go from page 1 all the way through. And then on the present levels of performance, there's a couple spots on there where you can ask your parents about their child. What are some future concerns you have for your child? On one of the sections of the present levels of performance, you can ask your parents that. Right? So that's definitely one way you can get your parents involved in an IEP meeting, because one of the biggest concerns that when an IEP meeting goes to mediation is that they're going to ask the parents involved in the process of developing the IEP meeting. And sometimes you will have parents that will not want to talk, that will not be involved. But as the district team, you need to document that you did ask the mom and dad. We asked the parents if they had any concerns. We asked the parents if they had, what were their goals for their son or daughter, and they did not respond. So sometimes that little bit of information on your meeting notes will allow your district to be more successful than not if it goes to mediation based on parent participation. So as we're going through the IEP, the beginning pages of the IEP, there are the present levels of performance. And I have to say, never have any empty boxes on the present levels of performance. If your present levels of performance in the areas of behavior, the student is not a behavior, they do not have a behavior goal, they've never been a behavior issue in class, you could just say something like, student's not presenting a current need in this time in this area, but never leave it blank, because remember, an IEP is a legal document. And when it goes to mediation, there's going to be someone that was never involved in the meeting that you're involved in that's going to look at all the words that are on this document and make a determination. So if something is blank, they don't know. That's why you can never leave anything blank. And so you kind of want to look at your present levels of performance. Quite often, I've seen this, Maxwell is doing well in reading. Okay, that's great, but can you give me a little bit more? You kind of want to make sure that your present levels of performance give some good quantitative and qualitative data. Something that really shows the parents that you really know where this child is. And so if you could talk about test scores, grade equivalents, age equivalents in the present level of performance, that's wonderful. Anything that you can talk about that revolves data based on assessments that you've given, that's going to let the parents know that you're doing a good amount of work to get to know where their son or daughter is in terms of all the academics. Of course, you have to know if they're going to do state testing. We have the new Smarter Balance, the California Alternative Assessment. One thing on that, the California Alternative Assessment, only 1% of students being tested in a school district can be allowed to take the California Alternative Assessment. And that's usually for the students that would be considered moderate to severe, because that's usually about 1% of your population. And then so you have the IEP goals. Okay, so if you learn or remember anything from today, how you develop your IEP goals can make a big difference. They need to be written in a SMART format. They need to be specific. They need to be measurable. They need to be attainable. They need to be based on time. So by a specific date, Craig, in a behavioral statement, will be able to, at a certain percent of accuracy, and then how many trials, and then how is it going to be assessed? Quite often, your advocates will look at this goal. Craig will be able to complete 10 double-digit addition problems with regrouping with 80% accuracy, 4 out of 5 trials. They're going to say, okay, 80%, 4 out of 5, 4 out of 5 is 80%, so 80% times 80%, that's 64%. So really, you want Craig to get a D on this goal? And so I've been in IEP meetings where I heard an advocate say that. And so then I just say, no, okay, I want Craig to learn double-digit addition. with regrouping, because our baseline for the goal is that Craig is not able to do this at this time. We want him to be able to do 10 problems with 80% accuracy. That's Craig's responsibility. 4 out of 5 times, 4 out of 5 trials, hey, we're allowed to have one off day. And that 4 out of 5 trials, that's kind of on the teacher. The teacher needs to make sure that Craig has been exposed to this at least how many times? 5 times. So, I put in here some examples of creating goals. So if we have Sarah, who's a 9th grade student, currently reads at a 5th grade level. She reads approximately 89 words per minute. Sarah is able to correctly answer 4 to 5 comprehension questions after reading a passage. If you're going to write a fluency goal for 10th grade, do you need any new information? Quite often, you have fluency goals in the elementary school level. And they say, Sarah reads 32 words at a 3rd grade level. And let's just say Sarah is in 5th grade. But they never really say how Sarah does at grade level. And quite often your IEP goals are created for the next year, correct? And the assessments that are quite often done are done based on the current year. So if you have a 3rd grade student who's going to be a 4th grade and you're doing a fluency rate, and you have a baseline that's telling you how the student is doing right now, but next year, they're going to be reading 4th grade material. So my recommendation is that when you're creating the baseline for fluency for the student, you assess them this year at how they're doing at 4th grade level. Because if they're in 3rd grade this year and they're going to be in 4th grade next year, you kind of need to know what their baseline is for 4th grade right now. Because next year, they're not going to assess them with 3rd grade material. They're going to assess them with 4th grade material. And when you have apples compared to apples, that works really well. Because next year, at the end of the year, they're going to look at the baseline from last year's goal. Well, last year, she was reading 32 words at the 3rd grade level. But then this year, she's reading 27 words at the 4th grade level. But you really never knew how many words at the 4th grade level she was reading last year. So it looks great. It looks fine and dandy as a goal, and most people won't think twice about it. But if you have an advocate, if you have a lawyer that is looking at this, they're going to say, you're looking at 2 different things. So sometimes we need to pre-assess what they're going to be exposed to that next year for the annual or triennial review this year. So then we're actually measuring apples to apples. As a program specialist, I saw that all the time, and that was something I was working on with my special education teachers. Next year, we're going to be looking at, assessments that are not going to be measuring apples to apples. So that's something for you guys to think about. Okay, I'm going to end here on this one. Quite often when you provide services to students with special needs, it is either number of sessions or times per week. This could be a sticky situation for some parents, and it could be cultural by the district that you're in. A lot of districts like to have number of sessions versus times per year, because they might say this child qualifies for speech and language pathology, and we're going to provide them 60 half-hour sessions over the year. But as a parent, what does that mean? Does that mean that you're not going to see my child for 120 days, and so for 60 days at the end of the year, you're going to see my child every single day? They might not understand that what number of sessions really refers to is that they're going to be seen twice a week over the whole year. But parents quite often want to have times per week. I want to know that my child's seen 3 times a week, 2 times a week, 1 time a week. So I think my time is ending, and I just want to end with this. The one person that can offer FAPE stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education, is the person that the district has designated that they can allocate district funds. Because when you provide a FAPE offer, because the district provides the FAPE offer, they're saying, we're going to spend all this money on your son or daughter. And at the end of an IEP meeting, it isn't a team decision. It isn't raising hands. All right, who likes this FAPE? We're going to put Craig in an STC class. We're going to give him speech and APE and OT for 3 times a week for 15 minutes here and 30 minutes there. Who agrees with this FAPE offer? It isn't a majority. The district has a responsibility to provide FAPE to the parents. The parent either says yes or no. It is that simple. And it's weird because we talk about having an IEP team decision, an IEP meeting, getting together and collaborating, but when it comes down to it, we cannot make the parent the professional. We cannot ask the parent, what do you feel about this FAPE? Because as soon as we ask them that question, we just made them the professional. They're not, they're the parent. Remember, even if they're a special education teacher by profession, at that meeting they're a parent. The district has a responsibility to say, this is our FAPE offer. And the parent either says yes or no. Quite often, a parent will sign the IEP meeting that they were present and that they received a copy of it. And I'm going to leave you with one last thing. I know, I think I said that 3 times. At your IEP meeting, maybe you passed around a draft copy of the IEP. And as you've gone through reviewing the services, reviewing the goals, the person that has taken the notes is making changes on the draft IEP meeting, and they're adding in new goals, or they're changing the services, or adding in different information. Make sure the parent leaves with a copy of that final IEP. Whether it is a copy of the written on draft, like the dirty copy of the IEP meeting, make sure a parent gets a copy of that. Or if you've been typing so wonderfully that you can print it off immediately right there, that a parent receives that copy, make sure a parent goes home with the final copy of the IEP that you decided on that day. And this is why. As you go home and you have Father's Day this weekend, you're going to say, oh yeah, I think I went to some conference on Friday. What did that guy talk? He talked about IEPs, but really what did he say? That's going to be your parent. Because as much as cognitive overload that you guys are experiencing right now, your parents at the IEP meeting are experiencing the same. And as they drive home, they're going to process everything. And when they go home and maybe both parents are there and they're talking to each other, do you remember what they talked about? I don't know. And if they don't have a copy of that IEP meeting documentation, they're not going to remember everything. And they might start questioning when they get a final copy, a nice clean copy. Is this really what we agreed upon? Did they make any changes? So the reason you want them to leave with it, even if it's a copy of the dirty copy that you wrote all these notes on, when they get a clean copy, they can look page to page and they can verify that nothing was ever changed. Okay. Thank you very much for being here today. I hope you came away with something. And I'm standing between you guys and lunch. So thank you. Thank you very much.